Piranesi meets Dante's Inferno. What is more magical and mysterious than magic? When they put an unnecessary letter in it. For yes, this book has magic with a K. Hello everyone, I am Rue, and I would love to welcome you back to another Rue with the Books video. In this video, I'm going to dive into Katabasis by R.F Kuang, who is known for her very popular series, The Poppy War, as well as Babel and Yellowface. I've never read one of her books before, but a Goodreads article made me aware of this one, and it sounded like good, cheesy fun. I like a good adventure story, and the promise of journeying through hell on a grand quest sounded too good to pass up. The blurb just sounded too interesting for me. I got a bit of a jump scare when I just finished Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, and I had found out that this book had literally just come out, like fresh off the press. So I decided to pick it up, read it for a little bit of fun, and make my own mind up as to whether I think R.F Kuang is worth the hype. Whether you love or hate R.F Kuang, be sure to throw a like my way for the algorithm. And while you're scrolling down there, press the subscribe button too. Thank you. Without further ado, grab a beverage, sit back, and listen to me yap about this book for the next 20 or so minutes. You've got an appointment with Rue right now. So, Katabasis is a dark academia romantasy book. It really heavily leans into the dark academia aspect by being very pretentious, over the top, and extremely dramatic at times. I've not really read a dark academia book before, unless you want to count Will of the Many by James Islington, which I personally wouldn't. So it was really exciting for me to pick up something more in line with the genre, right? I heard a great comparison for this book, which is Piranesi meets Dante's Inferno. That, I think, is pretty accurate. You can really tell that R.F Kuang had a lot of fun writing this book, putting together nerdy references to various philosophers, classic literature, quirky mathematical facts about calculus, hyperbolic geometries, mathematical tricks, and stuff like that. If you're into maths and science and can understand a lot of the references that R.F Kuang makes in this book, it can elevate the experience, I think, and just make it a little bit more fun to read. I do think, though, that you can definitely get by without completely understanding everything. But when the references come up, you might start rolling your eyes a bit at the pretentiousness if you just miss a bit too many of the references, I think. I'm not the most well studied in terms of classic literature and the philosophers of old, so it's not like all of the references were aimed specifically at me either. This book also contains an enemies to lovers narrative. It feels like that specific trope is being done a lot these days, and that specific element of the story has its ebbs and flows. Because they are on a perilous journey, there are hiccups along the way that teach them lessons and draw them together and then take them back apart, and everything feels quite real, where your relationship with someone isn't always going to be constant. You're going to be closer at times and further apart at others, that kind of thing. They start as a pretty uncohesive team at the start because of the competitiveness that is ingrained into them through their experiences at Cambridge. But it is fun to follow along with them throughout the book and see those barriers kind of fall apart and see them come together a little bit. This book covers many important topics and themes such as sexism, women in STEM, feminism, ambition, loss of self, and even illness. So there's a lot to kind of sink your teeth into in this book. So this book is about these two characters, Alice Law and Peter Murdoch, who decide to journey to hell to try and bring their professor back and his soul to the mundane world. accident. He died because an accident occurred in which his body ended up just being splattered like everywhere in the room in which he was last alive. Due to having read multiple accounts of people in hell, such as Dante's Inferno, the characters themselves, by the way, not me, they realize that they need to travel through the various circles of hell to try and find their professor, and they don't know exactly what sin he is the most guilty of, like whether he is more greedy than he is cruel, or if he's more of a tyrant than he is, full of desire, that kind of thing. So they need to pinpoint exactly which one he would be found in by kind of just really thinking about him, and doing essentially a character study of him. This journey involves many trials and tribulations. Each circle of hell has its own roadblock that its citizens, or shades, as they are called in this book, have to overcome to move on to the next, or to just reincarnate in general. As Alice and Peter move through these various circles, they have to overcome many hurdles and learn to work as a team, as well as learning as much as possible as they can from the citizens of hell themselves, to be able to, make it from one to the next and things like that. Just kind of learn the terrain and what they're kind of up to. There is plenty of interesting stuff that happens in this book. And when these things were happening, or there was just these conversations that were occurring, I was really, really gripped. There are some antagonists in this book. They aren't a sudden threat for most of the book, but there are accounts from various entities about the threat they possess, because they talk about what they've heard or what they've seen. So they are very kind of just in the background. I will talk more about them in the character section, so hold your horses for now. The reason I mention them is because they stand as roadblocks in the plot. There are parts where we kind of stop progressing rapidly through the plot because something has happened due to these people. But yeah, so it isn't always smooth sailing for our virtuous duo. What is more magical and mysterious than magic? When they put an unnecessary letter in it. For yes, this book has magic with a K. I'm joking around here, but actually the magic system in this book was probably one of my favorite aspects in the novel. It's incredibly unique and blends really, really well with the dark academia genre. What it essentially boils down to is paradoxes. The subtle line between something that is true and something that is false. It feels so incredibly fitting to just the word magic itself. We know that magic in the real world is not actually real, but it is illusions and tricks done by magicians. And this still really amazes us regardless, even that we know the veil can just be pulled back. And it evokes a childish wonder in us. The magic in this book really almost feels the exact same way. In this book, you can go to university and study magic. That is why Alice and Peter are in this mess to begin with. Their professor is one of the most famous and celebrated magicians in the world. His say-so means that any door within the magical world can be open to you. These magicians study paradoxes, or loopholes in logical thinking, that allow them to perform feats of magic. They're able to transcribe these paradoxes into pentagrams to do various things to either people or objects. For example, they can make perpetual flasks where water will never run out in them. They can make duplicates of objects by abusing the relationship between volume and surface in paradoxical form. And they can even make liminal spaces to trap people. For example, that piece of artwork with all the staircases, and it looks like, because they go at angles, when you would be walking on them, you just wouldn't be making any progress. You'd be going up and then down and left and right and all that kind of thing. And they can even make Dual Ways to Hell, which is how the plot in this book begins. The magic system in this book requires a lot of time, precision, and care to prepare. This means that it isn't like a typical fantasy book in which magicians are like running around and casting, hurling fireballs and magic at one another in these lavish fight scenes. No. In this book, the uses of magic are more subtle and tend to serve various purposes, like, giving them a tool that is going to let them survive in hell. To add further to the way that the magic lends itself to the dark academia aspects in this book, as I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of they use chalk to be able to actually draw these pentagrams and stuff. And that really adds to the pretentiousness because they have these discussions about which brand of chalk is better, which I've actually heard is a genuine thing. Professors and students will have a typical preference for which one they prefer. So yeah, that was a nice touch. Just to reiterate, I really, really like the magic in this book. Alice Law is a very ambitious young lady. She sets herself a colossal mountain to climb to graduate under the Jacob Grimes, because graduating under him opens doors to anything within the realm of magic. That is what Alice wants more than anything. She essentially wants job security or research security in the future because it is a very, very, very competitive field. And if you don't have the connections or are able to network enough, it's really, really difficult to make a career out of it after you graduate. Alice Law is a very complex character because her ambitions put her at odds with sexism and toxic masculinity, but her attitude to that isn't always positive. For example, she's very condescending to women in the same position as she is, i.e., they are also at university studying magic. If she sees another woman fail or give up graduating with Grimes, then she pokes holes at them. Alice sees them as not worthy enough or not smart enough, when a lot of those issues stem from the women not being intelligent or dedicated enough, but due to being victims of sexism, abuse, and power trips from people that do hold those positions of power. Alice thinks she has what it takes to play the game better than those other women, rather than to confront the underlying issues or confront just how unfair it is. And she makes these kinds of snarky, unfair, unjust comments about these other people that have been through stuff. Alice also believes that to be a successful magician, especially under Grimes, you have to be some kind of Buddhist monk that refuses any pleasure in life and actively chooses to suffer. So, no relationships, no lavish or delicious food, no parties, no fun, one plain meal a day, and as little sleep as is humanly possible. She must commit 100% to this, to her research and this PhD, if she is going to succeed under Grimes. And that is a really, really unhealthy attitude and lifestyle as well. There is a lot more to delve into with Alice's character, but I hope that this paints a picture as to what the book actually delves into in terms of Alice and the themes that cloud around her and just what to expect in general. Peter is Alice's partner in crime. He has his own sad, terrible backstory that I will not spoil, but it does build him into the person that he is within the book. An ambitious genius, an eccentric, someone who is incredibly kind to everyone, and someone who you just want fighting in your corner if the going gets tough. He does have his own weaknesses, but as do we all. Alice and Peter start in this book somewhat as enemies. They are acquaintances who are not quite ready to physically kill each other, but their ambitions and competitive nature puts them at odds with one another when striving for success under Jacob Grimes. If Grimes has an opportunity for one of his students, and Alice was to make a mistake around the time that the opportunity was to present itself, then it would go to Peter, and vice versa. Throughout this story, as they have to kind of put aside that rivalry that has been very prevalent in their lives for quite a while, and they have to start leaning on each other for various things. Their relationship starts to blossom. It's fun to follow them around and see what happens in the story. Those are our two main characters. There are some other magicians in Hell who appear throughout the story. They all play pivotal roles, and I found them to be super interesting in terms of who they are, but also how they go about with actually living inside Hell. One of them, Elspeth, is kind of like a scavenger on her own mission with figuring out how to move on. She's very kind to Peter and Alice and has some absolutely great moments with them. On the other hand, we have the Crypt Keys. They are a small family who are essentially like antagonists in this book because they do a lot of really, really evil and messed up things in Hell. It's actually not Peter and Alice who are the first to actually go into Hell on a journey for something. It was quite a popular fad, apparently. And the reason that a lot of them haven't made it back is because of the Crypt Keys. I won't go exactly into what they do because it is quite shocking. So you're going to have to read it for yourself and find out. We find out a lot about them through the various shades or souls that Peter and Alice meet because they've heard gossip about what the Crypt Keys have been up to, or they've actually seen the effects firsthand themselves. And when there was kind of more stuff being unveiled about the Crypt Keys, I was really excited to keep reading and find out more. Jacob Grimes is the goal in this book. As the story goes on, we find out just how awful of a person he is. He's prone to power trips, emotional manipulation, and just being quite a tyrant. However, Alice and Peter kind of idolize him, right? And put him on a pedestal as if all their suffering at his behalf is worth it, just because that is what it's like to work with a genius. We find out a lot about this man as the story goes on. He is a very, very despicable character who is easy to hate. He basically embodies a lot of those very, very toxic traits and paints a picture about how bad it can be to be under someone's power like that. I was a fan of the setting for this book. R.F. Kuang does not paint hell to be a pit of fire and suffering, like is very common in everything, but goes for a more subtle approach. Hell in this book is somewhere for a soul to dwell on their mistakes, with the aim essentially of writing a dissertation on what they did wrong in their life, which is to be graded, and if they do well enough, then they're able to move on and reincarnate. The 8 circles of hell are surrounded by expanses of like desert, which run alongside the Lethe, I don't really know how to pronounce that, which is a river that basically makes you forget about yourself if you walk in it, swim in it, drink it. You know, you get it. This desert provides a landscape for souls to reflect on basically whatever they need to reflect on. Um, if reflecting and feeling sorry for yourself does not cut it, the 8 circles also provide plenty of distractions that lets one give into their most carnal desires. So, for example, if you are most guilty of greed, if you're just an absolute glutton, then you basically can just stuff your face constantly if that's what you're up to. So that's just an example, and that basically is the case for almost every circle where there is something you can be distracted by which gives into that thing itself. And obviously, if you're doing that, you're not like making progress to redeem your soul and be able to reincarnate. But these distractions are not true living. Hell is painted as an awful imitation of real life in this book. It sounds kind of like a good deal at the start, but as the narrative unfolds and we live through it, we kind of find out all of the different pitfalls for shades and how getting out of them is really, really hard. R.F Kuang does not reinvent the wheel for the setting of hell in this book, but it was thematically and atmospherically pretty perfect for the story she was trying to tell. As a device, it served the narrative perfectly. There were even times I was quite impressed with her descriptions of things. So, now I get onto my feelings for the book. The most rambly collection of my thoughts, where I get very subjective as opposed to discussing what R.F. Kuang does for several important aspects of the book, as I did in the sections before. This book wasn't quite the cheesy fun I expected it to be. I was quite okay with that though. I think the themes that this book is trying to convey through Alice's character are very important, even in today's world, and I enjoyed R.F. Kuang's perspective in all of that. In fact, I felt it was quite educational. One of the issues I had with this book was the pacing of the plot. R.F. Kuang decided to keep giving flashback upon flashback upon flashback to tackle the theme she wanted to in this book. It made me feel like the plot was crawling at a snail's pace for about 60% of the book, which is quite a lot considering it's not actually short. It is like 500 or so pages. I appreciated what she was going for, but I do feel though that at times she was very heavy-handed with it. I think when Kuang was writing the more subtle experiences of sexism that Alice was experiencing, it felt a lot more realistic and went to prove that despite how progressed society is these days, it is still an issue that we need to combat and overcome. At times, Alice, or someone that Alice knew, was this victim of extremely blatant sexism and misogyny. I don't think that those kinds of experiences happen so much anymore, at least in academic circles, because people in positions of power that act that way, in most cases, do tend to be punished for it. Again, I'm talking about in academic circles here. And there are huge scandals that involve people losing their jobs, or would be huge scandals with people losing their jobs if those things were to actually happen. If that is not the case, then I do apologize for my ignorance. Going back to what I was saying about flashbacks, the flashbacks themselves are not frequently super relevant towards the plot. It could have been a bit better if Grimes was the villain in every single one of these flashbacks. I reiterate that the themes are important, but in terms of structuring a book, the flashbacks took me out of what was happening inside the actual plot. It felt like Kwang could have used an editor to tell her to calm down on it just a little bit, and try to incorporate these experiences into what was actually happening presently in time during the plot. I want to quickly compare it to another book that handles awful stuff happening to the character. And in Demon Copperhead, a lot of really, really bad things do happen to the main character. However, the plot and timeline is continuous and structured. And so these things all happen in the present moment. And so I'm not really taken out of the story thinking about what this character experienced in the past, because things are happening forefront and center. So you feel really hooked in. So what I'm trying to say is these experiences could have been better integrated, and it would have made me be a lot more like hooked into Alice's character. But I did feel like I was taken out of the story just for R.F. Kuang to go into and tackle these heavy themes. I also think that aside from flashbacks, Kuang went on too many side tangents, losing the plot a little bit on what she was actually trying to get into plot-wise, for the sake of building up the dark academia stuff. I personally didn't mind it, but I think it could definitely be very, very jarring for people. And I think if you're not like really, really focused, you can just kind of get confused and say again, like lose the plot on what is happening, which I guess you probably shouldn't be putting your reader in that position. I also found that considering the book was a romance, there just wasn't enough focus on Peter. As we were in Alice's POV, she was like idolizing him and putting him up on a pedestal and just gushing over his big genius noggin. We get so much emotional stuff from Alice, but really not that much from Peter. I feel like his character could have been developed more, so he could have been more multifaceted rather than one dimensional. And unfortunately, all of his backstory was just rammed into one chapter rather than getting it littered throughout, which would have made it feel a bit more cohesive. I hope the last section wasn't too much of a downer. Despite my criticisms, I actually did have a pretty good time with the book. Since this is a review, I think it's fair that I also talk about what could have been better in the book. I have already paid a lot of compliments to what I had liked, so, just a bit of both. So, to conclude, this book has a pretty gripping plot about two graduates who start as enemies and slowly turn into lovers throughout the course of the book, who are on a journey to save their professor from the grips of hell. Whether he actually deserves this retribution is truly questionable. I really enjoyed the setting, as it goes against the typical pit of fire and suffering idea we tend to have of hell. There were a lot of things standing in the way of Alice and Peter's quests that made things exciting throughout. I did find that the plot moved maybe a bit too slowly by focusing on too many flashbacks. To stay gripped by a book, it helps me if I'm not taken out of the plot too often. However, the flashbacks did serve a purpose because the themes tackled in them are important even to this day. The magic system in this book was very cool. It felt very fitting of a dark academia book, and I enjoy how it was used throughout the book. I could tell that R.F Kuang had a lot of fun writing the magic system, as well as making references to classic literature, philosophers, and maths that she did. If you aren't well versed in any of it, though, it could be jarring. The antagonists of this book were pretty interesting and messed up. The clash between our protagonists and antagonists was high stakes and even a bit emotional. I found the romance aspect to be a bit too one-sided, which led it to it feeling a little bit weak. If Kwang rebalanced the amount of Alice and Peter content to add more Peter and maybe just a bit less Alice, it would make she could have had more time to make Peter feel more multifaceted, and just the romance aspect for me would have been better in that case. So, overall, I rate this book 3 stars. There were a lot of great aspects, but some could have been improved. So, thank you for tagging along on this wild ride and watching my video. If you've made it this far, I hope you go to heaven. Genuinely. I hope that this review was informative and help you decide as to whether you want to pick up this book or not, especially if you're already on the fence. Be sure to subscribe. I upload weekly, sometimes multiple times. I'd love to hang around in your subscription feed. Anyway, until next time, Rue out.